Last year, I made a video about Christmas during the First World War and talked about a variety of different subjects, while deliberately avoiding one of the most well-known and perhaps the most misunderstood aspects, the 1914 Christmas Truce. This video is specifically about the truce, but rather than me telling you about it, it's better to hear it from someone who was actually there. What follows is the account of Captain Sir Edward Hulse of the 2nd Scots Guards, written just before his death in 1915. This is one of the only personal Christmas truce accounts which can be verified against official documents such as the battalion's war diary, and as such, while there may be some bias and exaggeration, we can be reasonably sure that it's close to the truth. So this is Captain Hulse's story about the Christmas truce and the rather unexpected circumstances under which it ended. We stood to arms as usual at 6:30 AM on the 25th, and I noticed that there was not much shooting. This gradually died down, and by 8 AM there was no shooting at all, except for a few shots from the border regiment on our left. At 8:30 AM, I was looking out and saw 4 Germans leave their trenches and come towards us. I told 2 of my men to go out and meet them, unarmed, as the Germans were unarmed, and to see that they did not pass the halfway line. We were 350 to 400 yards apart at this point. My fellows were not very keen, not knowing what was up, so I went out alone and met Barry, one of our ensigns, also coming out from another part of the line. By the time we got to them, they were 3/4 of the way over, and much too near our barbed wire, so I moved them back. They were 3 private soldiers and a stretcher bearer, and their spokesman started off by saying that he thought it only right to come over and wish us a happy Christmas, and trusted us implicitly to keep the truce. He came from Suffolk, where he had left his best girl and a 3.5 horsepower motorbike. He told me he could not get a letter to the girl, and wanted to send one through me. I made him write out a postcard in front of me, in English, and I sent it off that night. I told him that she probably would not be a bit keen to see him again. We then entered on a long discussion on every sort of thing. I was dressed in an old stocking cap and a man's overcoat, and they took me for a corporal, a thing which I did not discourage, as I had an eye to going as near to their lines as possible. I asked them what orders they had from their officers as to coming over to us, and they said none. They had just come over out of goodwill. They protested that they had no feeling of enmity towards us at all, but that everything lay with their authorities, and that being soldiers they had to obey. I believe they were speaking the truth when they said this, and that they never wished to fire a shot again. They said that unless directly ordered, they were not going to shoot again until we did. We talked about the ghastly wounds made by rifle bullets, and we both agreed that neither of us used dum-dum bullets, and that the wounds were solely inflicted by the high-velocity bullet with the sharp nose at short range. We both agreed that it would be far better if we used the old South African round-nosed bullet, which makes a clean hole. They think that our press is to blame in working up feeling against them by publishing false atrocity reports. I told them of various sweet little cases I had seen for myself, and they told me of English prisoners whom they had seen with soft-nosed bullets, and lead bullets with notches cut in their noses. We had a heated, and at the same time good-natured argument, and ended by hinting to each other that the other was lying. I kept it up for half an hour, and then escorted them back as far as their barbed wire, having a jolly good look round all the time, and picking up various little bits of information which I had not had the opportunity of doing under fire. I left instructions with them that if any of them came out later, they must not come over the halfway line, and appointed a ditch as the meeting place. We parted after an exchange of Albany cigarettes and German cigars, and I went straight to headquarters to report. On my return at 10 AM, I was surprised to hear a hell of a din going on and not a single man left in my trenches. I heard strains of Tipperary floating down the breeze, followed by a tremendous burst of Deutschland über alles, and as I got to my own company headquarters dugout, I saw, to my amazement, not only a crowd of 150 British and Germans at the halfway house which I had appointed opposite, but 6 or 7 such crowds all the way down our lines, extending towards the 8th Division on our right. I bustled out and asked if there were any German officers in my crowd, and the noise died down, as this time I was myself in my own cap and badges of rank. I found 2, but had to talk to them through an interpreter, as they could neither talk English nor French. I explained to them that strict orders must be maintained as to the meeting halfway, and everyone unarmed, and we both agreed not to fire until the other did, thereby creating a complete deadlock and armistice, if strictly observed. Meanwhile, Scots and Huns were fraternising in the most genuine possible manner. Every sort of souvenir was exchanged, addresses given and received, photos of families shown, etc. One of our fellows offered a German a cigarette. The German said, "Virginian." Our fellow said, "Aye, straight cut." The German said, "No thanks, I only smoke Turkish." It gave us all a good laugh. A German NCO with the Iron Cross, gained, he told me, for conspicuous skill in sniping, started his fellows off on some marching tune. When they had done, I set the note for "The Boys of Bonnie Scotland," where the heather and the bluebells grow. And so we went on, singing everything from Good King Wenceslas down to the ordinary Tommy's song, and ended up with Auld Lang Syne, which we all, English, Scots, Irish, Prussian, Württembergers, etc., joined in. It was absolutely astounding, and if I had seen it on a cinematograph film, I should have sworn it was faked. Just after we had finished Auld Lang Syne, an old hare started up, and seeing so many of us about in an unwanted spot, did not know which way to go. I gave one loud view halloo, and one and all British and Germans rushed about giving chase, slipping up on the frozen plough, falling about, and after a hot 2 minutes we killed it in the open, a German and one of our fellows falling together heavily upon the completely baffled hare. Shortly afterwards we saw 4 more hares and killed one again. Both were good heavy weight, and had evidently been out between the 2 rows of trenches for the last 2 months, well fed on the cabbage patches, many of which were untouched upon the no man's land. The enemy kept one, and we kept the other. During the afternoon, the same extraordinary scene was enacted between the lines, and one of the enemy told me that he was longing to get back to London. I assured him so was I. He said that he was sick of the war, and I told him that when the truce was ended, any of his friends would be welcome in our trenches, and would be well received, fed, and given a free passage to the Isle of Man. Another coursing meeting took place, with no result, and at 4:30 PM we agreed to keep in our respective trenches, and told them that the truce was ended. They persisted, however, in saying that they were not going to fire, and as we had been ordered not to unless they did, we prepared for a quiet night, but warned all sentries to be doubly on the alert. During the day, both sides had taken the opportunity of bringing up piles of wood, straw, etc., which is generally only brought up with difficulty under fire. We improved our dugouts, roofed in new ones, and got a lot of useful work done towards increasing our comfort. Directly it was dark, I got the whole of my company on to improving and remaking our barbed wire entanglements all the way along my front, and had my scouts out in front of the working parties to prevent any surprise. But not a shot was fired, and we finished off a real good obstacle unmolested. On my left was the bit of ground over which we had attacked on the 18th, and here the lines are only from 85 to 100 yards apart. The Border Regiment were occupying this section on Christmas Day, and Giles Loader, our adjutant, went down there with the party that morning on hearing of the friendly demonstrations in front of my company, to see if he could come to an agreement about our dead, who were still lying out between the trenches. The trenches are so close at this point that, of course, each side had to be far stricter, Well, he found an extremely pleasant and superior stamp of German officer, who arranged to bring in all our dead to the halfway line. We took them over there, and buried 29 exactly halfway between the two lines. Giles collected all personal effects, paybooks and identity discs, but was stopped by the Germans when he told some men to bring in the rifles. All rifles lying on their side of the halfway line, they kept carefully. The same night, the borderers and we were engaged in putting up big trestle obstacles, with barbed wire all over them, and connecting them, and at this same point, namely where we were only 85 yards apart, the Germans came out and sat on their parapet and watched us doing it, although we had informed them that the truce was ended. Well, all was quiet as I said that night, and next morning, while I was having breakfast, one of my NCOs came and reported that the enemy were again coming over to talk. I had given full instructions, and none of my men was allowed out of the trenches to talk to the enemy. I had also told the NCO of an advance post which I had up a ditch, to go out with 2 men, unarmed, if any of the enemy came over, to see that they did not cross the halfway line, and to engage them in pleasant conversation. So I went out, and found the same lot as the day before. They told me again that they had no intention of firing, and wished the truce to continue. I had instructions not to fire till the enemy did, I told them, and so the same comic form of temporary truce continued on the 26th, and again at 4:30 p.m, I informed them that the truce was at an end. We had sent them over some plum puddings, and they thanked us heartily for them, and retired again, the only difference being that instead of all my men being out in no man's land, 1 NCO and 2 men only were allowed out, and the enemy therefore sent fewer. Again, both sides had been improving their comfort during the day, and again at night I continued on my barbed wire, finishing it right off. We retired for the night all quiet, and were rudely awakened at 11 p.m. A headquarters orderly burst into my dugout and handed me a message. It stated that a deserter had come into the 8th Division lines, and stated that the whole German line was going to attack at 12:15 midnight, and that we were to stand to arms immediately, and that reinforcements were being hurried up from billets in the rear. I thought at the time it was a damn good joke on the part of the deserter to deprive us of our sleep, and so it turned out to be. I stood my company to arms, and made a few extra dispositions, and gave out all instructions. Suddenly, our guns all along the line opened a heavy fire, and all the enemy did was to reply with 9-inch howitzers, not one of which exploded just on my left. Never a rifle shot was fired by either side, except right away down in the 8th Division, and at 2:30 a.m. we turned in half the men to sleep, and kept the other half awake on sentry. Apparently, this deserter had also reported that strong German reinforcements had been brought up, and named a place just in the rear of their lines where, he said, 2 regiments were in billets that had just been brought up. Our guns were informed, and plastered the place well when they opened fire. The long and short of it was that absolutely nothing happened, and after a sleepless night, I turned in at 4:30 a.m, and was woken again at 6:30, when we always stand to arms before daylight. I was going to have another sleep at 8 a.m, when I found that the enemy were again coming over to talk to us on December 27th. I watched my NCO and 2 men go out from the advance post to meet them, and hearing shouts of laughter from the little party when they met in front, I again went out myself. They asked me what we were up to during the night, and told me that they had stood to arms all night, and they thought that we were going to attack them when they heard our heavy shelling, and also that our guns had done a lot of damage and knocked out a lot of their men in billets. I told them that a deserter of theirs had come over to us, and that they had only him to thank for any damage done, and that we, after a sleepless night, were not best pleased with him either. They assured me that they had heard nothing of an attack, and I fully believed them, as it is inconceivable that they would have allowed us to put up the formidable obstacles which we had on the 2 previous nights, if they had contemplated an offensive movement. Anyhow, if it had ever existed, the plan had miscarried, as no attack was developed on any part of our line, and here were these fellows still protesting that there was a truce, although I had told them that it had ceased the evening before. So I kept to the same arrangement, namely that my NCO and 2 men should meet them halfway, and strict orders were given that no other man was to leave the line. I admit that the whole thing beat me absolutely. In the evening, we were relieved by the grenadiers, quite openly, not crawling about on all fours as usual, and we handed on our instructions to the grenadiers in case the enemy still wished to pay visits. There are more accounts of the Christmas Truce which are firmly supported by other sources, and so give us an insight into the events of December 1914. But Captain Hulse's stands out, not only as a seemingly accurate story, but one which illustrates the complexity of the truce. It's clear that while both sides were tired of fighting, and each promised not to fire until the other did, they also took the opportunity to gain intelligence, or a tactical advantage. Hulse himself continued to view the German soldiers as the enemy, despite having no personal animosity towards them. In the end, it was confusion and mistrust which ended the truce in this part of the front line. But those short days of peace at least showed that, while they remained enemies, the soldiers of 1914 were not so different from each other.